I want to start by saying that I have verified this story to the extent that it can be verified. I'm not going to ask you to take any of it on faith alone because I wouldn't ask that of myself, and I don't think it would be fair to ask it of you. The parts of it that are documentable, I have documented. The parts of it that resist documentation, I've described as carefully and honestly as I know how. What I can't do is explain it. I've been trying to explain it for about 7 years now, and the best I've gotten is that the world contains things that don't fit neatly into the available categories, and that sometimes the things that find their way to you do so through channels that have more patience than you do. My parents told me I was an only child. I want to be clear about this because it's the foundation of everything else. Not that I vaguely understood myself to be an only child or that the subject never came up. They told me, directly and repeatedly over the years, in the normal course of family conversation, that I was their one child. That they had wanted more, but circumstances hadn't worked out that way. That I was enough. I believed this completely and without question for most of my life, because why wouldn't I? Parents tell you who your family is. That's a foundational thing. You build the architecture of your identity on it. The first indication that something might be off came in a way so mundane that I almost missed it entirely. I was applying for a passport renewal. My old one had expired, and I needed my original birth certificate, the long form, which I'd never actually looked at carefully before. I had the short form, the one most people have, the one that says the basics. The long form, which the passport office required, gave more information. I requested it from the Vital Records office, and when it arrived I sat down with it to make sure everything was in order before mailing the paperwork. There was a field on the long form that the short form didn't have. It was labeled number of children born in this birth, and the answer, typed in the clean bureaucratic font of a hospital record from the year of my birth, was 2. I read that field 3 times. Then I read the rest of the form carefully. My name, my parents' names, the hospital, the date, all of it matching what I knew. And that one field, that one number, 2, I called the Vital Records office. I asked them as calmly as I could whether there was any chance the form had an error, whether this was a standard field or a specific one, whether 2 could mean something other than what it appeared to mean. The clerk was patient and informative. She told me the field referred specifically to the number of live births in that particular birth event, and that a 2 in that field indicated twins. She said records like this did not contain errors in that field as a general rule because they were transcribed directly from hospital documentation at the time of birth. I thanked her and hung up and sat at my kitchen table for a long time. Then I called my mother. I want to tell you about that phone call because it was one of the most disorienting conversations of my life, and I've had a few of those. My mother answered. Normal, warm, the voice of my mother on a Tuesday afternoon. I said, Mom, I need to ask you something and I need you to be honest with me. I said I had my long form birth certificate in front of me, and it said I was born as part of a twin birth. I said, do I have a twin? There was a silence on the line that told me everything before she said anything. Not a confused silence, not an I don't know what you're talking about silence. The silence of someone who has been waiting for a conversation and has just heard it begin. She said, yes. I sat with that for a moment. Then I said, tell me. She told me. My twin was a boy. He was born about 4 minutes before me, which made him technically the older one by 4 minutes, a detail that landed with a particular weight when she said it. He had lived for 11 days. His lungs had not developed fully, a condition that the medicine of that time was not able to reliably address. And after 11 days he had died in the hospital before either of my parents had been able to bring him home. They had named him. His name was Daniel. My mother's voice while she told me this was the voice of someone describing something that had happened a very long time ago and that had been carried privately for a very long time, and that was both more and less painful to speak aloud than she had expected. She said they had decided, she and my father was gone by this point, had died a few years before this conversation. They had decided together not to tell me, not out of shame or deliberate concealment exactly, but out of a kind of protective instinct that she now acknowledged. in the way people acknowledge things when they're older and the decisions are far behind them, might have been the wrong call. She said they hadn't wanted me growing up in the shadow of a brother I'd never known, hadn't wanted me to carry a loss that they felt was theirs rather than mine. I listened to all of this. Then I said, "I've known about him for a long time." Another silence. Then she said, "What do you mean?" I told her. I told her what I was about to tell you. I had been aware of a presence alongside me for most of my conscious life. Not a visible presence, not a voice, not an entity that appeared and communicated in any conventional way. More like, I've tried to describe this many times and always end up reaching for the same approximation, like an awareness that I had a shadow that fell in a direction where no light was casting it. Something adjacent to me, the same size as me, moving when I moved, still when I was still, not inside me, not outside me in any locatable way, just alongside, parallel. I was aware of it, the way you're aware of a sound that's been present in your environment so long it has become part of the background rather than a distinct thing. Always there, always alongside. I had not, before the birth certificate, connected this awareness to anything specific. I had not thought of it as a person or as a presence in any paranormal sense. I had thought of it. On the rare occasions I thought of it directly, as a quality of my own consciousness, some feature of how I was built that gave my sense of self a doubled texture, a slight echo. I had mentioned it once to a therapist years before, who had suggested it might relate to a particular way my attachment patterns had developed, which was reasonable and not entirely wrong and also not entirely right. After the phone call with my mother, I sat with the new information alongside the old awareness, and I felt them fit together with the specific click of two things that had always been meant to be connected and had finally found each other. Daniel, 4 minutes older, 11 days in the world. I found his records. The hospital still existed, was now part of a larger system, and with some effort and some paperwork, I was able to access records that confirmed what my mother had told me. Name, dates, cause of death. He was real. He had existed. He had been the other number in the 2 on my birth certificate. I found where he was buried. A small section of a cemetery in the city where I was born, a section for infants, the particular heartbreaking small scale of that part of a cemetery that anyone who has visited one knows. His headstone was simple and small, his name, and the 11 days he had. I stood at it for a long time, the first time I went. I didn't have a lot of words for the occasion. I just stood there and felt the presence that had always been alongside me be for the first time in a specific location, at a specific headstone with a specific name on it. I said his name out loud, Daniel. Just that. And I want to tell you, carefully and honestly, that something shifted in the awareness I've always had. Not that it went away, not that the alongsideness disappeared, but it changed quality, the way a sound changes quality when you finally identify its source. It became less ambient and more particular, less like background and more like presence is the word I keep coming back to. The specific warm presence of something that had always been there and was now, for the first time, known. I've been back to that headstone several times since. I don't go on any schedule, don't feel obligated to make it a ritual. I go when I feel the pull to go, which is a few times a year. I stand there for a while. I talk sometimes and sometimes I'm just quiet. I bring flowers occasionally, which feels both necessary and slightly absurd in the way that gestures toward things we can't fully reach feel both necessary and slightly absurd. My mother and I have talked more about Daniel since she told me what he looked like, which is to say, she told me what I looked like, because he was my identical twin and the 4 minutes between us hadn't had time to differentiate us in any visible way. She showed me a photograph that I didn't know existed, taken in the hospital, both of us swaddled side by side. I'm not going to describe that photograph in detail because some things are too private to fully give over. But I will tell you that looking at it I understood something I don't think I'd understood before, which is that the alongsideness I'd felt my whole life was not a feature of my own psychology or a quirk of my consciousness. It was recognition. It was my nervous system knowing, at whatever level nervous systems know things, that there was supposed to be someone else, that there had been someone else, that the 4 minutes of my life when I was in the world, and he was also in the world, had left a mark that 11 days couldn't fully erase. I think about what those 11 days were like for him sometimes. Not in a sad way, exactly, or not only in a sad way, in a wondering way. He was in the world for 11 days. He was held and he was warm, and he was in proximity to me, wherever we were in those early days, and he was known. My parents gave him a name and they grieved him and they carried him privately for decades, and he was real and known and loved for every one of his 11 days. And then he stayed. That's what I believe, as much as I believe anything. He stayed alongside his twin the way I imagine some things stay. Not because they're trapped or unresolved, but because they want to, because the connection is strong enough to persist. Because 4 minutes of shared origin in the same body is a proximity that doesn't easily let go. He's been beside me for my whole life, every good thing and every hard thing. Every morning I've woken up and every night I've gone to sleep. The presence I mistook for a feature of my own mind was him, always him, the shadow falling in the direction where no light was. Daniel. 4 minutes older. Always there. I talk to him sometimes now that I know who he is, not in a way I'd describe to most people, not aloud usually, just the internal kind of talking that you do when you're moving through your day and something happens that you want to share and the person you want to share it with is alongside you in whatever way. He's alongside me. It's easy. It's always been easy because he's always been there. The only thing that changed is that now I know his name. Sleep well tonight. If you've ever had a sense of something alongside you, something that moves when you move and is still when you're still, something you couldn't quite account for but that never felt threatening, just present, I think you know what that is. I think it has a name. Good night, Daniel. Good night, everyone.